Hello and welcome to the Madecast, the official podcast of the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, a series of lectures on video game history as part of the Made's ongoing effort to preserve history through teaching and displaying playable exhibits of rare games and consoles. The museum is located at 921 Washington Street, downtown Oakland. Our hours are noon to 7 p.m. Wednesdays and Thursdays, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. Fridays and Saturdays, and 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Sundays. For the past few years, and still to this day, the support of people like you has allowed us to continue to bring history to you through lectures and interviews like the one you'll hear in a few minutes. I'm Jed, and this week I sit down with Michael Schiess, the Executive Director of the Pacific Pinball Museum in Alameda, California. We get into some of the history of pinball, including its mafia roots in the 1930s, the evolution of the technology in the decades since, and the importance of preserving the history of interactive play. Hello and welcome to the Madecast. Today we are joined by Michael Schiess, Executive Director of the Pacific Pinball Museum in Alameda, California, not far from our museum in Oakland. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
I've been instructed to send along our thanks for your team's help at Academy of Sciences at Nightlife a few months ago. Were you part of that?
I was part of that, but I got to put out a big thanks to, it was David Valansky who really figured out what was going on. He's pretty quick with the meter. They had one, and you happen to pick the wrong plug to plug into.
That's
I think I don't know how we got around that one, because I think we plugged into that, but somehow we figured it out real quick. But yeah, it blew out all your equipment. That was horrible. Yeah. They have since fixed it. Yeah, that was a couple Thursdays ago.
Yeah, that was late last year, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And are you much of a video game fan?
I have a video game, actually. It's Tempest. I am a fan of vector graphic video games. That's kind of where I draw the line.
Yeah.
Not to say that some of the newer things that are played on the home PCs are just amazing. The graphics and everything amaze me, but no, I just never got into the fighting part of it, or it was a big difference for me. I played Pong when it came out, and that was pretty cool. But to be honest with you, I would buy the monitors, the Vector black and white monitors. I still have one. I'd buy the color ones out of the Tempest when all this stuff went surplus. And I would hook them up to my analog synthesizer and make incredible, color patterns with the color one.
Oh.
And with the black and white one, I use it to teach. I'll bring an analog synth, and I use it when I'm teaching kids about physics and in particular sound and waveforms. It's a big oscilloscope. That's what it is.
Right.
And so you can put in signals and then modulate over that with your voice. So the kids, they really pick up on it, So, yeah, video games do have their place in my life, but unfortunately it's not the game part. It's the technology kind of.
At the museum, we have something called a Vectrex, and essentially it's a console and a PV in one, essentially. And it's all vector-based graphics. This came out, I think, in the early 80s or late 70s.
So it's a CRT?
It's a CRT with essentially a console built in.
Okay.
That's specifically vector graphics.
There's something about that. I don't know. I mean, there was a tank game, Battlezone, I think.
Yep.
I loved that one, when you blow them up, and just the way they just, blow up. I loved that. I wasn't very good at it, but I love the graphics on that. And Tempest just blew my mind, in terms of the way they did it. My day job was doing special effects for slides and stuff, and I developed like a color light source for shooting onto film. And it was all film back then. And then we developed one of the first computer to film rendering. It was just a box with a black and white monitor and a RGB filter that rotated and would shoot each color in succession. And we get a fairly high resolution slide.
Yeah.
And so, and then after that's when our company fell apart, because basically that's where the industry went. Nobody was doing film anymore, and that was pretty much my whole life up to that point was doing motion picture film and slide film work and special effects.
Where were you working when you were working on that stuff?
That was in San Francisco.
And then during this time, you're also playing a lot of pinball games, I assume?
Yeah, I was playing quite a few. I had one of my friends, when I got out of high school, Berkeley High, Ed and I were total pinball freaks. I don't know how that happened, but he liked pinball and I did. So we would, wherever we go, if we saw a pinball machine, we'd play flips usually. We used to just play solo, but it was the lack of funds that pretty much forced us to play flips because we could get twice as many games with the same amount of money. He'd take the left, I'd take the right flip, and we could kick butt on machines playing it because we're just in sync, and so we just would always play that way and we went to Germany together, and Germany in 73 and 74, it was crazy. We were in Hamburg in the Reeperbahn, which is, kind of I didn't even realize how dicey it was back then. I was just a naive 19-year-old kid. And they had some European machines, but mainly, it was all American. The American machines were always the best. And they called them Spielhallen. And yeah, they're just rows of pinball machines, And I guess all that stuff has been coming back to the United States. Now it's kind of going back to Europe because, they've developed a real taste for older, classic pinball. But yeah, we played all over. And then locally, there was a place called Silver Ball Gardens on Durant in Berkeley. It was pretty infamous for, being the pinball place. So,
how many machines did they have?
Wow, it's hard to remember, but I think they would have 10 to 15 pinball, and then they started getting into the video games.
Yeah, so tell me about, I guess, that transition. Late 70s, early 80s when the video games started coming in.
So the first, I distinctly remember playing Pong up on Northside Berkeley at the what was that pizza place? Laval's Pizza, and they had a Pong machine. What the hell is that? Wow, and pretty amazing. I'm always amazed by technology. To me, it's even when I find out how it works, it's still I'm always been impressed by it.
So yeah, the first machine you played was a Pong machine, and then where did it go from there?
My friend was pretty good at playing. We go to UC Berkeley at the Student Union building down in the basement. I think they call it the Bear's Lair. That's where I think you could really find more video games. And my friend was playing Centipede. I tried it. I sucked. I'm just not. I don't know what it is, but pinball. It was a natural attraction. I mean, I got my first pinball machine when I was about 14 or 15. I traded this big electric sign that I found, and my friend, his mom owned a bar, and they were getting rid of this pinball machine. So I gave him $10 in the sign, and I had my own pinball machine.
Nice.
They were supposed to take the coin mechs out, take the schematics out, and take them to the dump. They were supposed to dump and smash the back glass, just because they didn't want anybody else using that machine to make money.
I see.
So all the operators, pinball is pretty amazing because it obviously led into the video games, but video games came around, it was a much more kinder, gentler amusement business, because back in the day, it came out of the Depression, pinball. The only people with money were the ones running booze and gambling. It was the mafia, and they paid for a lot of factories to be built so they could build these pinball machines that they would then control where they went. People don't realize how big pinball was. It was making more money than the motion picture industry, supposedly for 30 years.
Wow.
It made so much money. There was, it was a nickel and a dime at a time, even a penny at a time. But it was a lot. It was so much that, Mayor LaGuardia, he outlawed it. And But the thing was, it was connected with this, with organized crime, and not only that, even some companies weren't that way, but they still wanted to maintain control over who could buy these machines and operate them. Much different than video games, where you just you open up an arcade, you buy the machines, and that's pinball eventually caught up, but it took a little while. I think Bally was still doing. Even after Flippers came out, they went back, and Flippers changed everything in pinball. And before Flippers, it was a gambling device. You got enough points, the bartender would give you a beer or money, whatever, and they had knockoff buttons to knock off the credits that you won. We're talking 999 credits, right? That was the max you could. Like, who's going to play 999 games, right? so the whole, whenever you see a pinball machine that has 3 digits for the credit unit, that's what that's about.
Interesting.
But that was a real big, you asked me like why didn't I make the transition to video games? The main reason was there was no credit given. You played it and you won. You didn't get anything.
Interesting.
With pinball, you always got something if you won. You'd hear it go pop. Everybody'd know that you just beat that machine. And that was a big deal, just the pride of of hearing that pop. And then everybody looks, oh, that guy won a game. He must be good, And hey, I never got really good at pinball. I still, struggle with it, but that's part of the charm of it. But I remember feeling that. When I remember winning 6 games on a Gulfstream, and later on in life, that was the first game I bought because it had that connection with me.
Sure.
I actually kicked the butt of that machine. Yeah, and I found that really odd. Why wouldn't video games follow suit with that? And I couldn't understand why people were dumping money into that. I remember talking to Tim Arnold, when he got his first Pong game, and he thought, this is just going to be a passing fad. And sure enough, a week later, it was broken, And so he went to open it up. And the reason it was broken was there were so many freaking quarters in that thing that it jammed up and it wouldn't take anymore. I mean, it was literally full of quarters. So he immediately went and bought like 10 more of them. I forget how many, but, he saw the potential of that. Yeah, and they sure made a ton of money, but it's interesting because video games have moved into the home, and pinballs are still a social sandbox, is what I call it. Kind of an adult sandbox for people to gather around, and play without the sand, of course.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say about the about the chime going off when you win the game is that like there must have been a culture around that, that evolved at arcades where there's certain signifiers of skill and I guess just a different culture from the modern arcade in what you're talking about.
It's not a chime though, it's a knock. Okay. It's very distinctive from all the other sounds. In fact, with the modern games, Stern started putting this loud chirp, and it's pretty obnoxious, but it sure lets everybody know that you won a game, right?
Right.
But they're kind of going back to the knocker because the knocker was a sweet sound. It was actually a solenoid with a plunger that was made. When it went off, it just knocked the side of the cabinet, right? And the cabinet's a pretty good sound box, so it's a very distinctive sound. I find it really interesting that pinball has gone up and down in cycles. From 1931, when it first made its commercial appearance in terms of manufacturing, where they were really cranking them out, and that was the beginning of the Depression. The Depression started basically in 29 and lasted for 10 years. Prohibition ended in 34, but pinball kept going. And so the mob kind of got squeezed out. Then LaGuardia, he did clean up New York. There was the history of it is the Tammany Hall was very corrupt regime in New York, and he swore he was going to clean up New York, and he did. Got rid of all the slot machines, and then that's why they turned to pinball, the mob.
And what was the journey for pinball from that to kind of legitimacy?
In the 50s, that's when the bingos were getting really popular. And the bingo machines it's a pinball machine with a bunch of holes, no flippers. It's gambling again. Bingo is a bunch of holes, like 25 generally, and a back glass that has the numbers, and you're lighting them up. You're trying to get 3 in a row, 4 in a row, 5 in a row. It wants you to you put 1 quarter in. You can start a game, but generally, the odds are really low. So you put another quarter in, and it increases your odds a little bit. You put a lot of quarters in it to get it set up so that if you get that 3 in a row, 4 in a row, it's really going to pay out, right? So these guys, I mean, there's a great record. I forget who that's by, about the pinball machine that stole all his money. It's at a truck stop, and the truckers were really into this stuff. The way I heard it was the feds came down on this stuff because the wives were sick of their husbands losing their whole paycheck on a damn pinball machine, So the feds started looking into it, and Gottlieb, was testifying, I guess, and they go, "Well, we don't do that, but Bally does." They pointed the finger at Bally.
And this is in court that they're doing this?
Yeah, I guess so. And so, they came down on Bally. They made it illegal to transport parts, things. And so, these guys are clever. They got around that. There's different stories, but one of the ones is they had this one game. Bally produced this one game. It was just a crappy game, and nobody could understand, like, why are they selling these things? They're all over the place. Well, they were like an amusement game. It had flippers and everything, but it was loaded with bingo parts because the only way they could get the bingo parts to people that needed them was to put them in the machine that was like an amusement machine. But what was funny was, I don't know if they were forced into, or they just saw the writing on the wall, but they started making flipper pinball. Mm-hmm. They actually started it in 56 and 57 with this incredible game, first multi-ball game. Then they didn't do anything for a while. They were back to making bingos and gambling games and other stuff, some amusement stuff. But when they finally just settled on making more and more flipper games, Gottlieb had come out with this really popular game called Tropic Isle, where you would, it's called a carryover. You do these things, and it's a back glass that's lit up. It's got a palm tree, and you do certain things, and all of a sudden a monkey appears. It lights up, at the bottom of the coconut tree. You keep doing it, and you advance that monkey up the palm tree, right, until he gets to the coconuts. And you get one game, when you get that one monkey there. Well, there's 3 monkeys, right? So when you come up on the game, and it's a carryover, in other words, it doesn't go away after the game ends because it's really hard to get that monkey to go up. It might take you 3 or 4 games just to get one monkey up there if you're good. So when you go up to the game and you'd see 2 monkeys there, and the third one's really close, that, wow, if I get that monkey up there, I'll even get 3 games, and that's pretty good. I found this game called Moonshot, and the artwork on it's incredible. They took Tropic Isle, and I've measured it and compared it. I mean, it is exactly the same play field. They just changed the artwork. And I wonder, God, how'd they get away with that? And I think they got away with it because Gottlieb, after what they did to Bally, wouldn't, and this kind of, Bally, I would imagine, is kind of scary, right? So you're not going to go mess with them. So they just copied that game. Like, here, what do you think of that? And so that one's at the museum. It's kind of funny to read about that and see,
So around what year is this where it's becoming, more accepted?
So, Well, there's a movie out, The Man Who Saved Pinball. I don't know if you've heard.
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either, but it's Roger Sharp. He played in front of the New York City Council. That was in '76. So pinball had been banned in New York for 40 years almost, 30 years. Yeah, quite a while. And I remember being in New York with my buddy Ed. That's where he is from. And he knew where to go to find pinball because, and I don't know how this worked. He was an Army brat, so the Army bases had pinball.
Okay.
Because they weren't under the jurisdiction of New York law. So you could go there. But there were also things called add-a-ball, where they didn't give you, you couldn't win a free game, you just could win an extra ball. And that's how they kind of got around the whole thing. That started to get it more accepted again because, because they considered a game, winning a credit, it had value, and it did. It was whatever the price of the game was. But an extra ball, they couldn't put a value on.
Right.
That's just extended play. So, so it started coming back. That was in the 60s, and a few other big cities, it was still banned. In fact, it was banned in Oakland until 2014. Arcades were banned in Alameda. Pinball, if you had a bar, you could have a few pinball machines, but you couldn't make that your main business. Same with video games. And after we started our museum, they kind of called me to the carpet, like, hey, what are you doing? This is illegal. And I'd already read the law, and they had their lawyers there and everything. I was just trying to get a permit for our sign, right? And they just said, oh, no, sir, what you're doing is illegal, and they really...
So how did you get around it?
Well, I read the law, and the law had to do with operating coin drop amusement machines. And so I just said, well, we don't do that. And they go, what do you mean you don't do that? I go, we don't do coin drop. I said, I took all the coin mechs out. We don't take any money in the machine. Well, how do you make any money? I just said, we charge admission, we ask for a donation. At first it was all, we just asked for a donation. Then we got our 501c3 and became legitimate.
So can you tell me about what year did you start, I guess, collecting, and then what kind of led to the creation of the museum?
The way it got started was I was working for the Exploratorium, building exhibits, and my background's electromechanical. And then I bought this house, and it was really run down, and so I quit my job at the Exploratorium so I could rebuild one of the places, start renting it out, and I was looking towards the future, and my wife and I put a lot of work into this house, and that's where all my energy was going. And then the Exploratorium started hiring me back as freelance. So I would go around all over to all these different museums. This is about 2002. And I decided that, besides doing that, the freelance work was so good that I actually had extra money. And I said, you know what? I really think pinball is an incredible art form. It just hasn't been presented that way. And the best way to do it would be to get some old machines and retheme them, with outrageous artwork, and really just take it to the limit, right? So I was going to do art pinball machines, and so I ended up buying 12 because this lady had 12 of them, and I wanted to buy, ones where she had 2 of them. So I ended up buying a bunch of double games so that I could fix one up and see how it worked and everything and preserve it, and then take the one and sand off the play field and all the art and redo it in my own to my own liking, because there was a lot of things I didn't like. I can do it. I just couldn't do it. It was kind of like, oh geez, I'm this is like chopping a Duesenberg. I just don't do that. So I ended up with all these machines that had some of them working, some of them not. I thought, well, what the hell am I going to do with it? So I thought, well, you know what? There's no place to play pinball. So why don't I just rent this place and I'll put the machines in there? So that's kind of how it got started. And it was this little speakeasy place. And we're still in the same place. We just expanded all the way. What was behind the main street is now on the main street. We just kind of bored through the whole commercial spaces, room by room, and we ended up on the front. And then, I was still working for the Exploratorium, and I'm fixing these pinball machines. I'm going, these are just kind of like science exhibits that I'm repairing. The public is pretty brutal. And on these science exhibits that I'm repairing, I mean, they just beat the crap out of them.
Yeah.
And I was looking at pinball going, well, people beat the crap out of those, but they don't break as much, So what is it about pinball? So it got me thinking, geez, you can teach a lot with this stuff. You can teach electricity and physics, art, and history. So it kind of, to me, I just thought it was because I know how pinball goes up and down, it's a fad and this and that. I thought, well, if we're really going to make a sustainable museum, it's got to have more than just pinball. You got to talk about what pinball was, where it came from.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible history. And the artwork was what really, my wife, that's kind of got my wife into it. She loves the artwork,
When you say art, you mean the actual visuals that are painted onto the
Yeah,
cabinet.
the graphics, yeah.
Okay.
And now it's gotten even, when I say the art of pinball, it's kind of changed lately because there's a lot of artists that are making their own machines, kind of like I wanted to do in the beginning. And I changed that into making kinetic art sculptures out of pinball stuff. So that's what I like to do. I'm making exhibits that deal with aspects of pinball and science. Like I made a giant Galton board, that you launch balls into it. A lot of it is just, keep the kids busy pulling that plunger. But eventually they get them all going, and they see the bell curve, and we talk about that. So a lot of it's educational, a lot of it's preservation. Nobody cares about this stuff that from the 40s and the. I mean, there are people, individuals, and there's online groups and everything, but there's no museum for pinball. There's all these places that there's a Seattle Museum, and they're all museums of pinball. Even the one in Vegas, but they have no education. I mean, and to me, a museum is a place you go to interact, sure, but you better have some educational stuff. Like, we just took out Space Mission. We took that out last night. Popped in another game. But Space Mission was, I was sort of like, why did Williams do a pinball on Space Mission? Which Space Mission was when the Americans and the Russians built two separate modules,
right,
and docked them in space,
right? Yep.
And largely forgotten, but pinball said, well, this is fantastic, And it's kind of funny because the different pinball manufacturers would do different things. And I always noticed that Williams was the one manufacturer that always kind of triumphed science. I remember talking to Gary Stern at one of our expos, and I said, because then everything went themed, movie themes, and that happened. Bally started that with Captain Fantastic and Tommy, or I'm sorry, it's called Wizard. Licensed games, Pinball always did that without actually, they walked right up to the line of legality, right? The Beatles, right? The Beatles were really popular in the 60s, right? How could you lose making a game about the Beatles? Well, the Beatles aren't going to let you because, you can't use their name. So they just went, okay, well, how about the Boodles, right? And they did that. There's a game, it's there at the museum in the Pointy People exhibition. It's called Beat Time, but on the back glass, it's the Boodles. It says that. And
change a few letters.
Yeah, Bally used the fonts in 8-Ball. Is that 8-Ball Deluxe? And it's the fonts, right? Well, the Fonz agents call him, hey, you're using the likeness of the Fonz. Oh, we can't do that? We're sorry. All right, we won't do that anymore. Well, they come back 5,000 games later. Hey, you're still using... Oh, we told them to stop. They must have not gotten the memo. I mean, I think they cranked out 15,000 of those games. I don't think Henry Winkler got a nickel. God, I hope he doesn't hear this.
I think it's passed now.
Yeah.
How many games are in the collection?
We have, I think, 1,300 games.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Unique titles. I think we've been selling duplicates during the pandemic. We had to shrink our, we were hoping to do expositions out at our warehouse, and then we pretty much got the word, no, that's never going to happen again. We did one, and then.
So you cycle through the warehouse and into the storefront, essentially.
Yeah.
You swap out machines kind of on a regular basis.
Yeah, we're trying to make it more regular, but now we finally got our own truck with a lift gate, so that makes it a lot easier. I was doing all this stuff in my van, and and then we got a trailer. Now we have a real truck. We just did it yesterday. We took in 5 games. They're all chronological, so you get the history of pinball. There's a bunch in the front that you can't play, the really 30s and early 40s stuff. It's bagatelle, is what they call it.
Right.
And then it starts with the first flippered game and goes through. So you can get a real education about the development of the technology and the artwork and the style of the game just changed, and it's gone through changes to where at this point, when I call it the art of pinball, anybody who really wants to can make their own pinball machine now. I mean, before it took a whole freaking factory and engineers and designers and everything. The board sets that have come out since, what inspired me, because I'm working on my own machine, electronic one, was TNA, Total Nuclear Annihilation. I started looking at that and I realized, these boards, you can buy these, and so you can buy the set. The programming is free, so you can design, get the parts and the boards to work everything and design your own pinball machines. And it has become more of an art form than it was before. We currently have on loan this drag queen pinball machine made by a friend of mine from the Exploratorium, Michael Brown. It's called Go Girl. And to play it, he made these little steel stilettos that you step into. You play the game. And this was made in the 90s. And it's an Earthshaker, Williams Earthshaker machine. So they redid the artwork. They put their own computer in there. It's got a little video camera. When you get to a certain point and you're successful, then it stops and it takes your picture and then lets you try on different wigs. And then you get a little further and it's always going, you go, girl. It's hilarious. That's great. And I mean, these guys, he's Exploratorium, so he's pretty talented, but he did the programming. I mean, basically they took a machine and paralleled onto it with all this stuff. It's pretty amazing, especially really cool for back then.
So so that's a pretty active scene, the kind of homebrew pinball scene.
I'm not sure exactly how big it is, but if you look at the fact, when we started out in 2002, Stern was making machines. Arcades weren't really around. There hadn't been a home market, and I remember them. I remember Gary saying he was going towards phasing out the pinball, closing the pinball, and it was the last one. Williams went out in 2000, and they had bought up Bally. Gottlieb had gone under in '98, I think. There wasn't anybody left except Stern, and he was getting ready to fold up. We started doing our expos. I think that had a lot to do with charging up the whole pinball industry. They all came because we just looked at it different. We looked at it as, no, this stuff's really, you need to see all of pinball. And really check out the beauty of what it is, and it just sort of lit the fuse on. Well, what can I say? There's now at least 10 or 12 manufacturers making new pinball, and I just put in it's not really an exhibit. I just wanted to show what's happened. For the first time, we have 4 different manufacturers on coin machines. So that if people don't want to come into the museum, pay the admission and play all day, or we have 4 coin machines. Each one's from a different manufacturer. And there's, that's just the top. It's Stern, Jersey Jack, Chicago Gaming is now making reproductions of older games because they've gotten so popular. The price on Addams Family has gone up to $14,000,
Wow.
and so it's now. But they made a lot of those, so they haven't reproduced those yet. Don't quote me on that one. I'm not sure about the price. I do know that Twilight Zone has gone up
higher
quite
than
a
it should
bit.
be. Yeah.
The ones that were really popular, Medieval Madness. You've never played that?
I haven't played that one.
Oh.
I played Adam. I don't know.
Yeah. Medieval Madness. Yeah, it was so popular that was the first game. They said, you know what? Everybody, the prices on these things are up to $12,000, and this was quite a few years ago. Let's remake it.
Yeah.
We own the Planetary Pinball bought the license, so yeah, they made it, and they remade it really well. So then they've so far remade 4 really popular games: Attack from Mars, Monster Bash, and one that I bought from them, which is Cactus Canyon, which is one I always wanted, but that was the last game that Williams made before they went to Pinball 2000, and they only made a couple of games out of that. So the first standard pinball game, or the last one, was that, and everybody wanted one, but you couldn't get them; they're too expensive.
That's interesting, because what do you see as kind of what's the modern appeal of pinball machines? Because obviously we live in a world full of digital distractions, video games, and TikTok and whatever.
Right.
What is kind of the modern appeal, in your opinion, of pinball machines?
It's real. I think people really long for something that they can put their hands on. It's tactile. Video games don't offer that. They don't offer the tactile. You get to shove this machine around, and it's a ball in a box. You're fighting gravity. You really got to be on your toes, because they've really gotten sophisticated with the story behind the game. And fortunately, they are starting to get a little bit away from themed games, especially the independent manufacturers. They're coming up with their own themes. They're not just grabbing a movie or a TV series. And that was one thing I remember talking to Gary Stern about. I asked him, hey, when are you going to start making original themed, games again instead of these movie, And he just said, "Oh, kid, the days of TNA are over." I got to say, he doesn't get enough credit. He kept a lot of pinball alive. The other person that really helped keep pinball going was Steve Young from the Pinball Resource, because he kept manufacturing the parts that after all, like Gottlieb closed, where are you going to get your parts to keep your machine going? So instead of all these machines going to the dump, like the manufacturers wanted them to,
Right.
They ended up in people's houses and stuff.
Right.
That developed the whole home market and everything. Then the video game people said, well, we're getting cut out of this, and so they started making virtual pinball games. A lot of people have these, and it's more of a video game. I mean, it is pinball. You're playing pinball on a long, and they're getting pretty good at it. But there's this tactile thing missing.
Sure.
And they even put those things in, like little things that bump the cabinet to make it feel like the ball's moving around. And they actually have flipper coils in there when you hit the flipper buttons so that you hear the flippers going, And they, some people even put chimes and things like that. And the great thing is that you can have 100 games in this one machine.
Right.
The other thing that's kind of cool is everybody, people can gather around and watch you play. They don't necessarily do that with video. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but a lot of video games are played in your mom's basement, or
yeah,
I'm gonna get in trouble for that one. They're not in an arcade.
Different culture.
Yeah,
yeah.
They're not in an arcade. You're online playing against somebody that across the country or wherever. Pinball's maintained a social gathering place because people go in there to compete directly with one another on multiple player games. But the other thing is that when you're playing, other people are watching you, and you're almost like performing playing a musical instrument.
I think that's an ethos that the Maid Museum and the Pinball Museum have in common, where like we see the interactive in-person part of our museum as a really important aspect of like, this is a place where you can come and not just see and learn, but also play, with other people who are interested in the same thing. So I think it's really cool that like Pacific Pinball Museum shares a lot of those same values.
Yeah. I know. I want to get back there again. It's been a while.
Yeah, let me know. I'll give you a tour.
Yeah. You guys are a nonprofit also,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty hard being a nonprofit in this realm, because we're not saving the baby whales. People don't understand what value this adds to society. I would counter that interactive gaming, that what you guys do and what we do, is a real important part of bringing society together, bringing people together. It's hard to do that these days. Everybody, especially after pandemic, people need that. You really need to. Yeah. I mean, it's and the kind of video gaming you guys do is personal. It's in-person gaming. That's important.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that I just don't want people to forget about the technology and the development and all the things that went into this. It tends to get just, when the next new thing comes along, this just gets swept away. That was key. And so you guys are in the same realm that we're in, preservation of things that, just one thing that saddens me about America is that we don't respect the stuff that came before this, and eventually, it's going to go. I mean, that's one thing I loved about electromechanical machines. When the EMPs hit, knock out all the computers, I'll still be able to play my electromechanical pinball machine. Yeah. In fact, the real interesting ones are the purely mechanical games from the 30s. They're very clever what they did without electricity, without any stuff. And it's and like we have this baseball game, one of that is you play one inning of baseball. We took it to the Cal Academy. Mm-hmm. And people line up to play that one. It's funny. We have new machines and all this stuff. I've been to a Google I/O where Chris Kuntz and I went there, and we had my clear pin, and this we did the history of pinball, ending up at Adams Family, or I'm sorry, a newer machine, and all these engineers, talking robots walking around, a flying car, all this stuff, and all these engineers, high tech. They were lined up 20 deep to play the 1934 mechanical game because they were fascinated at tell there's no cord on it, and yet it managed to count, does strikes and balls and runs and outs.
Wow.
Yeah. Keeps track of all of that. And when you get 3 outs, that's it. The game's over. Right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. I think preserving that history is important. And I think that gaming history isn't even as old as pinball history, but a lot of those early days are still being forgotten. And so I think it is important, to preserve that somewhere.
Yeah.
Where can people find the museum? What are your hours?
Geez, we're at 1510 Webster Street in Alameda. And we are open 6 days a week. We're closed on Mondays. We open at 11 o'clock and go till 9 o'clock, except on the Saturday, or Friday and Saturday, we're open till 10. Admission is $22 for adults. Everything's on free play except for the 4 machines in the front. And yeah, you play all you want all day. You get a wristband so you can go out and get lunch or dinner and come back. Some people spend the whole day there.
Well, let's find a time to get over there and play a few pinball games.
Okay, I'd love to do that.
We get, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the Maidcast.
Jed, yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I really thank you for coming by.
So we're here at the actual museum in downtown Alameda. It looks like you've got a room with maybe 30 or so pinball machines, another room with how many?
So there's a total of 106 games you can play. Then there's a collection of static games that are, from the 30s and 40s that you can't play because they don't have flippers. They're not that interesting, and they're a little too precious for us to let the public play them.
Yeah, tell me what I'm looking at here.
Okay, so this is improvements in parlor bagatelle, and this was done in 1869 by Montague Redgrave, and it's a commercialization of the French game bagatelle, which they say it originated in Greek, the actual game of rolling a ball up a hill and letting it curve back and hit something.
Sure. Yeah, that's way back.
Yeah, way back. This came out of the French aristocracy because they had lawn bowling and things like that where you'd hit pins. So they decided to make an indoor game. But the bowling thing was just too long for indoor use, So they said, okay, well let's just take the whole bowling concept and fold it in half and put it at an angle. So instead of just a straight shot at bowling at these pins, you'll have to roll it up and around, and then it'll come back down on the other side. So that's where the curve thing at the top of the pinball came from, and that's where the whole concept kind of was developed from. A folded up lawn bowling.
Yeah, tabletop lawn bowling.
Yeah. If you turn around, you'll see Mayor LaGuardia. He's pushing over a bally bumper. Right. He's our anti-hero, I guess, for pinball. He really hated pinball. And it's funny because we have that game here.
Okay.
Not the one in the picture, but a bally bumper that was confiscated from Oakland when they were illegal, and the cops Oakland police went and scooped them all up. And I guess in 1935, 1936, a bally bumper was probably comparable to like an Apple computer these days, right? So they weren't going to toss them in the bay or smash them up. I'm sure they did, a lot of them. But instead, Alameda at that point was a kind of a loosey-goosey party town.
Yeah.
So the police brought him over and gave him as gifts to the Alameda police, and that is where I got this one.
Is that where that one came from?
Yeah.
I'd love to take a look at this one.
Take a look.
You got it right over here.
So this is the first game that you launch the ball, and when it hits one of those little spring things, it makes points. And it made 1 point.
Not bad.
So it's pretty amazing. The thing that's really unique is it's got a little projector for the score unit. So every time you hit one of those little bumpers, it puts 10 points on there.
It's got like a backlit score counter. It's 80, 90, 100.
It's a little projector. It's got a disc with the numbers on it, and it's got a little lens. And they've eventually used that to project the credits, like how many credits you've won. Bally was the king of gambling games, and right next to it, this is a bingo game. A bingo game is where you have a bunch of holes, no flippers, and it's one of the earliest ones, not the earliest, but it's a bingo card, and the more money you put into it, the more the odds will go up. 24.
Okay. And then 24 lights up on the board up there. Okay, I get it.
13. Oh, see, the 13 and the 2. That's good. Now I want a 9. And these are the games that rob people of money. I mean, now it's starting to. You hear that thing in the back? It's starting to scan to see if I have any winning numbers. Now the amazing thing about these, if somebody does well and they're winning, it has what's called a reflex unit. The reflex unit adjusts the odds down. So
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It makes it harder.
So bad.
It makes it harder to win.
That's incredible.
For the next person. I don't think anybody knew what it was. We didn't know what it was. I mean, we have a top-notch guy, Chris from Pinball Pirate. He's our mentor for fixing these things on our Fix-It night. And he kept looking at that thing, and he didn't know what it was. And then he's the one who figured out, it is a reflex unit.
That's like a modern discovery.
Well, they used it back in the 50s,
The people
40s,
in the
and 50s.
factories, but it sounds like maybe the people playing it didn't know about it. The shop owners didn't know about it.
It was a sealed unit.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know when, it was common knowledge, but yeah, they're kind of funny. It's like a little transmission.
Yeah.
That the more you win, the less liberal it's going to be with giving you points.
Right.
Yeah. It actually racks them back.
So, as you can tell from that segment, we did find a time to visit the museum, and there was just way too much history for me to be able to cover. But I highly recommend checking it out on Webster Street next time you're in Alameda, or you can check out pacificpinball.org to learn more about their work. Thank you for listening to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment's official podcast. If you've got any thoughts, questions, corrections, or general museum ideas, shoot us an email at info@themade.org. We'd also like to send out a big thank you to everyone who donated recently, and to our Patreon supporters who help keep the Made afloat. Patreon supporters get to listen to this podcast 1 week before it's released on major streaming services, and we'll continue to do that with future episodes every other week. This week's episode was brought to you in part by Patreon donors Priska Ekins, Karen Brenchley, and Eel Waffles, apparently. Thank you for your support. Until next time, I'm Jed, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.